You're not stuck because you're bad. You're stuck because you think you already know. Think about the last time you failed at something important. A deal you almost closed. A skill you practiced for years. A relationship you thought you understood. It didn't collapse because you lacked ability. It collapsed because in one quiet moment, you stopped listening. You stopped asking. You assumed. Modern life rewards confidence, but there's a hidden cost no one warns you about. The moment you believe you've figured it out is the exact moment your growth quietly dies. And the samurai knew this long before we did.
The real conflict of modern life isn't ignorance, it's premature certainty. At the beginning, learning feels alive. You observe, you ask questions, you listen carefully because you know you don't know. Then something shifts. You gain experience. People start calling you good. Results appear. And slowly, without noticing, your mind closes its doors. You stop asking beginner questions. You stop hearing feedback as information, only as noise. You don't look anymore. You assume. This is where most people plateau. Not because learning becomes harder, but because humility becomes uncomfortable. Psychology calls this overconfidence bias. Philosophy calls it arrogance. The samurai called it something more precise, the loss of Shoshin, the beginner's mind. In Japanese tradition, Shoshin does not mean being unskilled. It means approaching each moment as if nothing is guaranteed, as if your previous victories cannot protect you now. A master swordsman knew something modern culture forgets. Technique does not die from lack of practice, it dies from lack of humility. That is why true masters trained basic movements long after students believed they had outgrown them. Not because the basics were weak, but because the ego is. The modern world teaches the opposite lesson. We are told to brand ourselves as experts, to speak confidently, to defend our opinions, to react quickly. But speed without openness creates blindness. The faster you react, the less you see. And once you stop seeing, learning becomes impossible. This is the hidden tragedy behind many stalled careers, broken relationships, and wasted potential. People don't fail because they don't know enough. They fail because they no longer question what they think they know. Shoshin is not about going backward. It is about reopening a door you accidentally locked. A door that allows you to ask, to listen, to learn again. And the moment you reopen that door, everything changes. But first, you must face the loop that keeps it shut. The loop always begins quietly. Nothing dramatic happens at first. No explosion, no warning sign. Just a familiar situation. A conversation you've had many times. A task you've done before. A problem you believe you already understand. Your body relaxes, but your attention disappears. This is the first trigger. Because when the mind says, "I know this," it stops listening. You interrupt before the other person finishes. You skim instead of reading. You act before checking. Not out of arrogance, but comfort. Confidence feels safe. Curiosity feels slow. And modern life rewards speed. So you react. You choose quickly. You speak quickly. You decide without hesitation. For a moment, everything feels under control. Until it doesn't. A small detail is missed. A tone is misread. A condition changes, but you don't notice. And suddenly, the result doesn't match your expectation. Confusion appears. Your heart rate rises. Your mind tightens. Why isn't this working? I've done this before. This is where panic enters. Not loud panic, but subtle panic. You don't slow down, you double down. You push harder with the same assumptions. You repeat the same approach, faster.
This is the trap. The samurai understood that panic is not fear. Panic is the refusal to become a beginner again. Because becoming a beginner feels like losing status. It feels like admitting weakness. It feels like stepping down. So instead of asking a simple question, you defend your position. Instead of observing, you explain. Instead of listening, you justify. And the loop tightens. Trigger, assumption, reaction, error, self-blame, more reaction. This is why intelligent people get stuck longer than beginners. Beginners expect to be wrong. Experts feel betrayed when they are. And the deeper your identity is tied to being good, the more painful it becomes to say, "I don't know." The samurai broke this loop differently. At the first sign of disturbance, they returned to basics, not technique, but attention. They slowed the mind before slowing the body, because they knew something most people learn too late. You are not trapped by lack of skill. You are trapped by the moment you stopped asking. At some point, something breaks. Not the situation, but your explanation of it. You begin to notice a pattern. The same mistakes, the same frustrations, the same feeling of being almost right yet consistently wrong. This is the moment insight tries to enter. But insight does not arrive as clarity. It arrives as discomfort. Because the real cause is not external. It is not lack of information. It is not bad luck. It is not other people. The real cause is harder to face. You stopped learning the moment you stopped questioning yourself. This realization feels dangerous. If the problem were skill, you could fix it with effort. If the problem were knowledge, you could fix it with study. But if the problem is identity, then the solution threatens who you think you are. So the mind resists. You tell yourself, "I know this already. I've been doing this for years. This shouldn't be hard." And yet, it is. The samurai warned about this exact moment. They knew that mastery creates a hidden enemy, attachment. Attachment to past success, attachment to reputation, attachment to being seen as competent. Shoshin exists to cut this attachment, not violently, but cleanly. Beginner's mind does not mean forgetting what you know. It means refusing to let what you know blind you. A master returning to beginner posture is not regressing. He is resetting perception, seeing again what familiarity erased. This is why Shoshin feels uncomfortable at first, because it removes your psychological armor. You can no longer hide behind experience. You must look directly. And when you do, you notice the truth. Most mistakes happen before action, in the assumption phase, in the moment you decide you don't need to check. This is where progress was lost, not in execution, but in listening. The insight is simple but brutal. Growth did not stop because you reached your limit. It stopped because you stopped entering the room as a student. And once you see this, you face a choice. Return to the comfort of certainty or accept the vulnerability of Shoshin. Only one of these leads forward. Insight alone is not enough. Knowing the cause does not immediately free you from it. In fact, this is often where things get worse, because now you see the problem, but your habits are still in control. You try to change on the surface. You promise yourself to be more open, to listen better, to stay humble. But the moment pressure returns, the old reflex takes over. You fall back into certainty. This is the lowest point, not because you fail again, but because you fail knowing why. You catch yourself interrupting, assuming, reacting too fast, and the shame is sharper now. I should know better. This thought is poison because it pushes you to perform humility instead of practicing it. You pretend to listen, you nod,
but inside, you're still defending your position. This is false Shoshin. The samurai warned about this too. They knew the ego could wear the costume of humility, bow low, but refuse to empty the mind. At this stage, many people quit, not the skill, but the effort to change. They conclude, this is just how I am. I'm too experienced to start over. It's too late. But this is where the real test begins. True Shoshin does not appear when you feel calm. It appears when you feel exposed, when your confidence collapses, when your identity feels unstable. The samurai trained for this moment deliberately. They placed themselves in positions of discomfort, slow training, silent repetition, basic forms, not to feel competent, but to relearn attention. At the lowest point, something essential is stripped away, the need to be right. And without that need, space appears, a small pause, a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but decisive. This pause is where transformation begins, not through force, not through motivation, but through surrender. You stop trying to protect your image. You stop proving you know. And for the first time in a long while, you actually listen. This is the breaking point, and also the doorway.
The shift does not arrive with confidence. It arrives with silence. Not external silence, but the silence of no longer needing to answer immediately. A question is asked, a situation changes, and this time you do not rush to respond. You pause. That pause feels uncomfortable at first, almost like weakness. But inside that pause, something important happens. Your attention returns. This is the first correct use of Shoshin, not as a philosophy, but as a behavior. You ask a simple question, not a clever one, not a strategic one, a beginner's question. What am I missing? What has changed? Can you explain that again? The samurai practiced this kind of pause deliberately. Before striking, they observed breath. Before moving, they emptied intention, not to hesitate, but to see clearly. Because clarity does not come from speed, it comes from openness. In this moment, your body softens, your mind stops defending. You are no longer trying to protect your expertise. You are trying to understand. And understanding changes everything. Details reappear. Signals become visible. People respond differently. Not because you became smarter, but because you became present. This is why Shoshin is often misunderstood. People think it means staying ignorant. In reality, it means staying available. Available to correction. Available to surprise. Available to learning. The samurai did not abandon mastery to practice Shoshin. They used Shoshin to protect mastery from decay. Because without beginner's mind, skill becomes rigid, and rigidity breaks under pressure. The shift is subtle, but permanent. Once you experience this pause, you realize the truth. Progress was never blocked by lack of ability. It was blocked by the fear of becoming a beginner again. And now, that fear has lost its power. You don't need to prove anything. You only need to keep the door open.
What happens when the loss of beginner's mind is no longer personal, but cultural? To see the difference, look at how societies train competence. In traditional Japanese disciplines, martial arts, calligraphy, tea ceremony, the student never graduates from basics. Even masters return to foundational forms, not to improve technique, but to preserve perception. The culture understood a simple truth. When certainty hardens, awareness fades. Shoshin was not treated as a personality trait. It was treated as a safeguard against arrogance, against decay,
against the illusion that the past guarantees the future. Now compare this with modern performance-driven cultures. In many Western systems, speed is rewarded over depth, confidence over curiosity, opinion over observation. From classrooms to boardrooms, people are trained to speak quickly, to defend their stance, to signal expertise. Pausing is mistaken for weakness. Asking basic questions is mistaken for incompetence. So people learn to hide their uncertainty. This creates a collective pattern. Organizations stop listening to warning signs. Leaders stop questioning assumptions. Teams repeat strategies that once worked long after conditions change. Failure, when it comes, looks sudden, but it is never sudden. It is the result of thousands of ignored signals. The samurai would recognize this immediately. They knew that defeat rarely comes from a stronger opponent. It comes from blindness. And blindness spreads faster in groups than in individuals. When no one wants to look like a beginner, everyone pretends to know. Innovation slows, mistakes compound, responsibility diffuses. On a societal level, the loss of Shoshin creates rigid systems that react aggressively to criticism, that double down instead of reflect, that mistake confidence for truth. This is why cultures collapse not at their weakest, but at their most certain. History repeats this lesson relentlessly. Empires fall not because they lack power, but because they stop learning. The samurai ethos offers a quiet counterexample: strength with humility, skill with openness, authority without attachment. Shoshin, applied collectively, creates resilience, because a society that can ask beginner questions can adapt, but a society that confuses expertise with infallibility cannot. The lesson is uncomfortable but essential. The same mindset that stalls a person can stall an entire civilization, and the antidote is the same. Reopen the door, return to listening, stay teachable, especially when you are strong.
Shoshin becomes powerful only when it is practiced, not as a belief, not as a mindset you admire, but as a daily behavior. The samurai did not wait for moments of crisis to return to beginner's mind. They trained it into ordinary life. You can do the same without changing your schedule, your career, or your identity. The method is simple. It is called the beginner question. Once per day, in any situation that matters, ask one question you would only ask if you were new. Not to appear smart, not to challenge others, to understand. The question itself is less important than the posture behind it. Examples: what am I assuming here? What would I notice if I had no experience? What might a beginner see that I'm ignoring? What changed since the last time this worked? At first, this will feel inefficient. You will feel slower, less certain, exposed. This is the cost of reopening the door. But something else begins to happen. You start noticing details earlier. You catch mistakes before they grow. You respond instead of react. This is how the future changes, quietly. Shoshin does not create dramatic breakthroughs. It prevents silent decay. Over time, the beginner question rewires your relationship with pressure. Instead of tightening under stress, your mind opens. Instead of defending past success, you adapt. This is why long-term mastery belongs not to the most talented, but to the most teachable. The samurai understood that survival depended on this. A warrior who could not question his assumptions would die quickly. Modern life is less violent, but no less unforgiving. Careers end, relationships fracture, relevance disappears, not because people stop trying, but because they stop learning.
The future belongs to those who keep entering each moment as students, not naive students, disciplined ones. Shoshin is not about starting over. It is about never closing the beginning.
You were never stuck because you lacked talent. You were stuck because at some point you stopped arriving as a beginner. The samurai never confused mastery with certainty. They knew the greatest threat was not the enemy, but the moment the mind closed. Shoshin is not about lowering yourself. It is about freeing yourself, freeing your attention, freeing your learning, freeing your future. Every time you assume you already know, a door quietly closes. Every time you ask like a beginner, it opens again. The question is not whether you are skilled. The question is this: when the moment matters, will you protect your ego or reopen your mind? Today, ask one beginner question, not to prove anything, not to perform humility, to see. Because growth does not end when you become good. It ends when you stop being curious. And mastery belongs to those who never stop entering the room as if it were their first time.